After being thrown out of a house she never imagined entering, an ordinary woman carries in her hands what can heal a pain no one else could touch. But only those who stay until the end will understand why. The living room clock showed exactly 6 in the morning when Henry Miller was already up, adjusting his navy blue tie in front of the mirror. His reflection showed a 42-year-old man with well-trimmed brown hair and eyes that carried a weariness no amount of coffee could dispel. Through the bedroom window, he could contemplate the first rays of sun rising behind the mountains of New Haven, Massachusetts. The view was one of the reasons he had chosen this house 3 years ago, when he decided his daughters needed space and fresh air to grow up away from the chaos of the city. The house, an elegant 2-story home in a gated community, had been meticulously planned to offer maximum security. Cameras in all 4 corners of the property, electric fence alarm system connected directly to the community's security center. Henry checked the locks 3 times before going to bed, a ritual he never failed to complete, even on the most exhausting days. He finished getting ready and walked down the hallway toward the twins' room. He knocked softly before entering, as he always did, though he knew the girls would be sleeping. Lily and Madison, who had just turned 9, were sleeping huddled together in Madison's bed, despite having individually decorated rooms of their own. Their dark brown hair spread across the pillows, and only a very attentive observer could distinguish the subtle differences between the two. Henry approached with soft steps. His eyes for a moment softened as he observed his daughters. Looking at them, he saw Claire's face, his wife, who had passed away 3 years ago in a car accident on the highway connecting Boston to New Haven. The memory still hurt like a dagger, but Henry had learned to keep this pain only for moments. Of solitude, when the girls were already asleep and no one could see him fall apart. "Girls," he called with a controlled voice, gently touching Lily's shoulder. "Time to wake up." The girls awoke almost simultaneously, as if they shared not only their appearance but also their sleep cycles. They opened their eyes, identical to their mother's, brown with small golden specks around the iris. "Good morning, Dad," murmured Lily, the more outgoing of the two, rubbing her eyes. "Why is Madison in your room again?" Henry asked, his tone more severe than he intended. Madison, the quieter and more observant one, sat up in bed and lowered her gaze to her own hands. "She had a dream about Mom and got sad," explained Lily protectively. Henry's expression hardened, almost imperceptibly. The subject of Claire wasn't forbidden in the house, but Henry never knew how to react when the girls brought up memories of their mother. His instinct was always to change the subject, to direct to something practical, tangible, like schedules and commitments. "I understand," he said, checking his wristwatch, "but remember our agreement about sleeping each in your own room. We have 6 minutes to have breakfast on the table. Mrs. Zelda is already preparing everything." The girls nodded, already accustomed to their father's precise timing. There was no room for delays in the Miller household. Henry left the room, leaving the door ajar to make sure his daughters wouldn't fall back asleep. In the kitchen, Mrs. Zelda, the cook who came every morning to prepare meals, was organizing the breakfast table. At 62, she was the oldest employee in the house, having been with the family since before Claire's passing. "Good morning, Mr. Henry," she greeted, placing a cup of black coffee on the table. "I made that carrot cake the girls like." "Thank you, Zelda, but today they'll just have fruit and cereal. Lily complained of a stomachache yesterday, and the school nutritionist sent a circular about balanced nutrition." The elderly woman sighed, discreetly, but didn't argue. She had long learned that questioning Henry's decisions was futile. Since the accident, he had become inflexible in his parenting methods, as if he could compensate for the mother's absence with unbreakable rules and routines. The girls came down punctually, already dressed in their private school uniforms, one of the most prestigious and secure institutions in Boston. They sat at the table in silence, methodically eating their breakfast. "Dad," Madison called after a few minutes, her voice almost a whisper, "today is the day to bring a special object for expression and memory class." Henry frowned, chewing a piece of toast. "What kind of object, Madison?" "Something that reminds us of someone important," the girl explained, her eyes fixed on her plate. "I wanted to bring Mom's bracelet, the one with blue beads." The silence that followed was dense. Henry swallowed with difficulty, feeling his chest tighten. Claire's jewelry was stored in a box at the back of his closet, untouched since he had collected them from the nightstand beside their bed. "I don't think that's appropriate, Madison," he finally replied. "Valuable objects can get lost at school. Why don't you take that teddy bear keychain I bought during our trip to Old Forge?" The girl's eyes welled up, but she just nodded without arguing. Lily shot a concerned look at her sister, but also remained silent. They had learned early on that insisting rarely changed their father's mind. Henry checked his watch again. "We're on schedule. Sarah will arrive in 5 minutes to stay with you until school time." Sarah was the current caregiver, the fourth in less than 2 years. The previous ones had resigned, unable to adapt to Henry's demands and the emotional climate of the house. Sarah, a woman in her 30s with a degree in education, seemed to be the most resilient so far, completing almost 5 months of work. As predicted by Henry, the doorbell rang precisely at 7 o'clock. Sarah entered hurriedly, her hair still damp from a recent shower. "Good morning, Mr. Henry, girls," she greeted with a tense smile. "Good morning, Sarah," Henry replied, already picking up his leather briefcase from the sideboard. The girls just finished breakfast. Madison complained about a bad dream last night, so keep an eye out for any signs of anxiety. The medication is in the kitchen cabinet, 3rd drawer if she needs it. Lily has ballet class after school. Her uniform is in the pink backpack. The schedule with all the times is updated on the refrigerator. For any emergency, call me immediately. Sarah nodded, absorbing the instructions like a soldier receiving orders. Henry quickly kissed his daughters on the forehead and headed for the door. "Oh, I almost forgot," he turned before leaving. "The new baby monitor is installed in the living room and bedrooms. I'll be monitoring from my cell phone during the day." Sarah forced a smile, but her eyes betrayed her discomfort with the constant surveillance. The girls remained impassive, as if the presence of cameras was as natural as the air they breathed. As soon as the door closed, a collective, almost imperceptible sigh ran through the room. Sarah's shoulders relaxed slightly, and the girls exchanged quick glances. "Shall we brush our teeth and get our backpacks?" suggested Sarah with a lighter voice. As the twins climbed the stairs, Sarah watched them thoughtfully. Working in the Miller house was like walking on eggshells every day. Henry was a decent man, paid well and on time, but his obsession with control suffocated any possibility of spontaneity. The girls, despite being well-mannered and affectionate, rarely genuinely smiled. Their gazes contained a melancholy too deep for 9-year-old children. Upstairs, in the shared bathroom, Lily and Madison brushed their teeth side by side in silence. Through the mirror, Madison noticed her sister watching her. "Everything will be okay," whispered Lily so softly that only her twin could hear. "One day I'll get that bracelet for you." Madison smiled timidly, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. In the room next door, the red light of the baby monitor blinked continuously, as if reminding them that even in the most intimate moments, they were never really alone. In the car on his way to the law firm where he was a partner, Henry observed his daughters preparing for school on his cell phone screen. His colleagues admired him for his dedication to the girls, for the way he managed to balance his successful career with raising his daughters alone. No one needed to know how much that apparent competence cost him, how many nights he spent awake, fearing something would happen to his daughters, the only piece of Claire he had left in the world. Traffic was slow that morning, allowing his thoughts to wander. He remembered how Claire always said he was excessively cautious, laughing at his tendency to plan every detail. "Life doesn't fit into spreadsheets, my love," she used to say. But Claire was wrong. Life, Henry had discovered in the most painful way possible, was precisely the kind of thing that needed to be controlled, planned, protected at all costs against chaos and unpredictability. His daughters would never suffer from lack of preparation or vigilance, not while he could prevent it. Monday began in an atypical way in the Miller house. The phone rang at 5:30 in the morning, waking Henry even before the programmed alarm. On the other end of the line, Sarah's tense voice explained that she was in the hospital, suffering from severe abdominal pain during the night. The preliminary diagnosis pointed to appendicitis, and surgery was scheduled for that same morning. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Henry," Sarah said, her voice weak from the effect of painkillers. "I know you have that important hearing today." Henry ran, his hand through his hair, trying to process the information while his mind was already calculating the implications. That morning's hearing was crucial for the firm, a corporate dispute case involving one of the state's largest mining companies. As a senior partner, his presence was indispensable. "Don't worry about your health, Sarah. Focus on your recovery," he replied with a controlled voice, hiding his growing anxiety. "Get well soon." He hung up the phone and immediately dialed the babysitting agency he usually used in emergencies. The attendant, with a sleepy voice, informed him that at that hour it would be impossible to find someone available for an immediate start, especially in New Haven, away from downtown Boston. The feeling of helplessness, so rare in his meticulously planned life, made Henry feel a tightness in his chest. He breathed deeply, trying to regain control. He looked at the clock. 5:40. The girls would wake up in 20 minutes. As he dressed hurriedly, he dialed the number of Paul Mitchell, his partner and closest friend since their days in law school. Paul was one of the few who understood what Henry had gone through since the accident that took Claire. "Paul, sorry about the hour," he said as soon as his friend answered. "I have an emergency. Sarah, the girl's caregiver, is hospitalized. I have the Aurora Mining Company case hearing this morning, and I have no one to stay with the twins." "Calm down, Henry," Paul replied, already sounding awake. "I know someone." "Who can help?" "Dorothy Parker, a lady who worked at my mother's house for years. She's like family to us. She currently takes care of children in family homes. She's absolutely trustworthy. Could she come now immediately?" "I'll call her. She lives in St. Anthony, not too far from New Haven. I'll send you her contact in a few minutes." Henry thanked him, a bit relieved but still suspicious. He didn't like strangers in his house, especially someone who had never been subjected to his rigorous selection process, which included background checks and multiple interviews. But the situation required exceptional measures. Punctually at 6:00, he entered the twins' room to wake them. As he suspected, he found them again sleeping together in Lily's bed. "Good morning, girls," he called, turning on the bedside lamp. "We have a change in routine today." The twins woke up, looking at their father with sleepy curiosity. Changes in routine were rare enough to deserve immediate attention. "Sarah is sick and won't be able to come today," he explained, sitting on the edge of the bed. "A new person will come to help for a few days, until Sarah gets better." "Is she okay, Dad?" asked Lily, genuine concern in her voice. "She will be," answered Henry, surprised by his daughter's compassion for someone who, after all, was just an employee. "Now, let's get ready. Breakfast is almost ready." In the kitchen, Mrs. Zelda had already arrived and was preparing pancakes, ignoring the restrictive diet Henry had implemented in recent weeks. He decided not to comment, recognizing that this was not a day for more conflicts. "Mr. Henry," called Mrs. Zelda while serving coffee, "I can stay with the girls until this new person arrives. I know you're worried." Henry considered the offer. Mrs. Zelda, despite being reliable in the kitchen, had health problems that prevented her from keeping up with the energy of two 9-year-old children. Additionally, she needed to return home by noon to care for her husband, who suffered from heart problems. "I appreciate it, Zelda, but I need someone who can stay all day. The hearing may extend into the afternoon." His cell phone vibrated in his suit pocket. It was Paul sending Dorothy Parker's contact along with a message. "She's on her way, should arrive in 40 minutes. Henry called immediately, needing to hear the voice of the person to whom he would entrust his daughters. Dorothy answered on the second ring. Her voice was firm and serene, with a heavy Massachusetts accent that revealed her local origins. "Good morning, Mr. Henry. I'm in the taxi, on my way to your residence. Mr. Paul explained the situation to me. You can rest easy." Something in the way she spoke, a confidence without arrogance, made Henry feel a drop of trust. Even so, he bombarded her with questions about her experience, references, and approach with children. Dorothy answered everything with patience and clarity, without being intimidated by the interrogation. "The girls have breakfast at 6:20, leave for school at 7:30. The school van picks them up at the inner gate of the community," Henry instructed, still on the phone. "The complete schedule is on the refrigerator. Any questions? You must call me immediately." At 7 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Henry, who had already instructed the girls about the expected behavior with the new caregiver, went to the door. Through the intercom, the porter's voice announced Dorothy Parker's arrival. Henry opened the door and found himself facing a woman of approximately 65, grey hair tied in a simple bun, wearing a navy blue skirt below the knees and an impeccably ironed white blouse. She carried a worn leather bag and a colourful umbrella despite the clear sky that morning. What most caught Henry's attention, however, were her eyes. Dark and deep, they conveyed a serenity that seemed out of place in the agitation of that atypical morning. Her gaze examined him for a moment, without judgment, but with a silent understanding that left him inexplicably uncomfortable. "Good morning, Mr. Henry," she greeted with a restrained smile. "I'm Dorothy Parker." Something about that encounter, perhaps the stress of the situation, perhaps the disconcerting sensation of being read by those eyes, made Henry take a step back. All his protective instincts were instantly activated. The woman before him didn't fit the profile he had mentally established for caring for his daughters. She seemed too simple, too traditional. Nothing about her indicated the clinical efficiency Henry valued in his employees. "I'm sorry for making you come all the way here, Mrs. Parker," said Henry, remaining on the threshold of the door, blocking the entrance. "But I just received a message from Sarah. She's better and will be able to come today after all." It was a lie, of course. Sarah was probably being prepared for surgery at that moment, but Henry's discomfort with this stranger, with that gaze that seemed to see beyond appearances, was stronger than his need for help. Dorothy showed no surprise or offense. She just nodded slightly, as if she had already expected that reaction. "I understand, Mr. Henry," she replied calmly. "If you need me on another occasion, you know how to find me." She turned to leave, but at that moment, the twins appeared in the entrance hall, curious to meet the new caregiver. Lily, always more outgoing, approached the door. "Hi, I'm Lily," she introduced herself, ignoring her father's warning look. "And this is my sister, Madison." Dorothy smiled, a warm smile that lit up her entire face. "Hello, Lily. Hello, Madison. What beautiful girls you are." There was something in that brief interaction that made the girls return the smile, a gesture that had become rare in recent months. Henry felt a knot in his stomach, a feeling of loss of control that terrified him. "Girls, get back inside," he ordered with more harshness than he intended. "We need to hurry, or the school van will leave without you." The twins reluctantly obeyed, casting glances back as they moved away. Henry turned to Dorothy, who remained impassive. "As I said, we won't need your services today," he repeated, his tone colder. "I appreciate your availability." "Of course," replied Dorothy. Then, before turning away, she added, "You know, Mr. Henry, sometimes fear makes us build walls so high that we end up prisoners of them. Your girls are precious. They have eyes that speak." Without waiting for a response, Dorothy moved away toward the community gate, the colourful umbrella swinging gently in her hand. Henry closed the door, feeling an irritation he couldn't name. Who was this woman to make observations about his daughters, to insinuate that there was something wrong with the way he was raising them? He returned to the kitchen, where the girls were finishing breakfast in silence. He needed to find a solution quickly. The hearing would begin in less than 2 hours, and he still had no one to stay with the twins. "Girls," he said, trying to keep his voice calm, "there's been a change of plans. You'll come with me to the office today. You can stay in the small meeting room with your tablets. I have an important hearing, but I'll ask Lucinda, my secretary, to keep an eye on you." Lily and Madison exchanged glances. It was the first time they would go to their father's office on a normal weekday. The novelty, despite the context, brought a small excitement. "Can we bring our books too?" asked Madison timidly. "I'm reading The Little Prince." "Yes, you can bring whatever you need to keep yourselves entertained, as long as you stay quiet," replied Henry, already checking his watch. "We have 20 minutes to leave." While the girls went upstairs to get their things, Henry called the office, explaining the situation and asking Lucinda to prepare the room for his daughters. The secretary, efficient as always, assured him that everything would be ready when they arrived. Upstairs, Lily and Madison were packing their backpacks, whispering comments about the white-haired lady who had come to the door. "She seemed nice," murmured Lily, putting her pencil case in her backpack. "I saw when she smiled at us. It was a real smile." Madison nodded, thoughtful. "Her umbrella was so pretty, full of colors even though it wasn't raining." "I wonder why Dad didn't let her in," questioned Lily, lowering her voice even more. Madison shrugged, but her eyes reflected an understanding beyond her years. "He's afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Of everything," Madison answered simply. From the bedroom window, which overlooked the entrance to the community, Madison saw Dorothy's distant silhouette waiting at the taxi stand. There was something about that figure, perhaps the upright posture, perhaps the colorful umbrella contrasting with the landscape, that conveyed a feeling she hadn't felt in a long time. Something akin to hope. That same night, while Henry worked in his home office after putting the girls to bed, Lily sat silently on her bed with a drawing pad and colored pencils. Carefully, she began to draw a white-haired lady holding a multicolored umbrella. In the corner of the page, she wrote in her childish handwriting, "She understands." She hid the drawing under her pillow when she heard her father's footsteps in the hallway, making his usual nightly rounds. Something about that brief morning encounter had planted a seed in her heart, a premonition that the lady with serene eyes and colorful umbrella would cross her path again. The 3 weeks following Henry's refusal of Dorothy were particularly challenging for the Miller family. Sarah, the caregiver, needed a longer recovery period than expected after her appendicitis surgery, and Henry found himself divided between the law firm and domestic responsibilities. That Saturday morning, while the twins were still sleeping, Henry took advantage of the silence to organize his daughter's room. It was a task he usually delegated to the housekeeper, but there was something comforting in the methodical organization of toys and books. It was one of the few activities that gave him the illusion of control amid the chaos his life had become in recent weeks. While arranging Madison's bookshelf, he noticed a school notebook partially hidden behind a row of children's books. The cover was decorated with star and unicorn stickers, typical of a 9-year-old girl. Something about that notebook sparked his curiosity, perhaps the fact it was hidden, perhaps the intuition that it contained something important. Henry hesitated. He respected his daughter's privacy within certain limits, but his protective instinct always spoke louder. He opened the notebook, justifying to himself that he needed to check if there was anything school-related that demanded his attention. The first pages contained math exercises and small class essays, nothing out of the ordinary. It was upon reaching almost the end of the notebook that he found something different, a loose sheet folded several times as if it had been hidden with special care. With hesitant fingers, he unfolded the paper and immediately recognized Madison's careful handwriting. At the top of the page, a simple drawing of a woman with long, wavy hair, wearing a blue dress. Claire, without a doubt. Below the drawing, words that made his heart tighten. Dear Mommy, in heaven, today the teacher asked us to write a letter to someone special. Everyone is writing to people who can answer, but I wanted to write to you. Dad says you're always watching us, so maybe you can read this letter somehow. I miss you so much. Sometimes I wake up at night, and for a second, I think you'll be there, sitting on the edge of my bed like before. I remember when you used to sing that little boat song until I fell asleep. I wish I had someone to talk to about the things I feel. Dad is good and takes care of us, but he gets sad when we talk about you. Lily is my best friend, but she gets sad too, and I don't want to make her sadder. It's hard when you miss someone, and nobody lets you talk about it. The art teacher said drawing helps, so I've been drawing you every day in my secret notebook. I met a lady the other day who had kind eyes like yours. She had a colorful umbrella even though it wasn't raining. I think you would have liked her. With love and longing, your Madison. Henry sat on the edge of the bed, feeling his legs weaken. Madison's letter hit him like a punch to the stomach, leaving him breathless. For the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to cry openly, tears staining the paper in his trembling hands. How had he not noticed? How had he not seen that, in his desperate attempt to protect his daughters from pain, he was preventing them from processing grief in a healthy way? The letter revealed an emotional maturity and a pain that Madison, his quiet and observant daughter, had kept hidden behind obedient silence. "Dad?" Lily's voice startled him. She was standing at the bedroom door, her hair disheveled from sleep, watching him with a mixture of surprise and concern. "Are you crying?" she asked, approaching cautiously. Henry tried to hide it, wiping his tears with the back of his hand, but it was too late. Lily had already seen his exposed vulnerability, something he had carefully hidden from his daughters since the accident. "I'm fine, sweetheart," he replied automatically, trying to compose himself. Lily looked at the paper in his hands and recognized her sister's drawing. Her eyes widened. "You found Maddie's letter to Mom," she said, not as an accusation, but as a statement. Henry nodded, unable to deny the obvious. "Did you know about this letter?" "I helped her choose the colors for the drawing," admitted Lily, sitting next to her father. "Maddie writes to Mom when she's really sad." The simplicity with which Lily spoke, the naturalness with which she mentioned that secret ritual of comfort that the two had developed, deeply affected Henry. His daughters had created mechanisms to deal with loss, mechanisms that he, in his rigidity, had never perceived or encouraged. "Why did you never tell?" "Me?" he asked, his voice breaking. Lily shrugged, a gesture that carried more wisdom than any 9-year-old child should have. "You get sad when we talk about Mom, and then you get angry, but not normal angry. It's scared angry." Lily's words echoed, in Henry's mind, revealing a truth he had refused to see. His unresolved grief was shaping the way his daughters expressed, or more precisely, repressed, their own emotions. At that moment, with Madison's letter in one hand and Lily's silent presence beside him, Henry made a decision that would change the course of the Miller family's life. It was time to seek help. After breakfast, when Madison was still sleeping, Henry asked Lily to play in her room while he made an important call. Locked in his office, he breathed deeply several times before dialing the number Paul had sent him. Weeks ago. After 3 rings, the serene voice he remembered answered, "Hello? Mrs. Parker, this is Henry Miller. We met a few weeks ago." "I remember perfectly, Mr. Henry," replied Dorothy with no sign of resentment in her voice. "How are the girls?" The question, so simple and direct, caught Henry off guard. It wasn't about the terms of possible employment. It wasn't about availability or payment. It was genuinely about the well-being of his daughters. "Actually, that's the reason for my call," admitted Henry, feeling a lump in his throat. "They're not well, and I think I need help." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line, not of hesitation, but of understanding. "I see," Dorothy finally said. "When would you like me to start?" "As soon as possible, Monday," suggested Henry, surprised by the ease with which Dorothy had accepted, without questions or recriminations about their previous encounter. "I'll be there at 7 in the morning," confirmed Dorothy. "And Mr. Henry, thank you for calling." When he hung up the phone, Henry felt a weight being lifted from his shoulders. The decision to allow Dorothy into their lives was the first in a long time that wasn't motivated solely by practicality, but by a genuine concern for the family's emotional well-being. On Monday, punctually at 7 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Henry, already dressed for work, answered the door. Dorothy was there exactly as before, grey hair in a simple bun, modest clothes, the same colourful umbrella, despite the clear sky that morning. "Good morning, Mr. Henry," she greeted with a gentle smile. This time, Henry opened the door completely, inviting her in. "Good morning, Mrs. Parker. Please come in." The twins, who were having breakfast in the kitchen, raised curious eyes when Dorothy entered, accompanied by their father. There was a moment of recognition, and then, surprisingly, a spontaneous smile appeared on both their faces. "You remember Mrs. Parker," said Henry, more as a statement than a question. "She'll be taking care of you starting today." "Hello, girls," said Dorothy, approaching the table. "It's good to see you again." Your umbrella is still colourful, observed Madison, pointing to the object Dorothy had left on the entrance sideboard. Dorothy smiled, a smile that illuminated her wrinkled face. Yes, it's the same one. I always carry it with me, even when the sky is blue. Why? Asked Lily, genuinely curious. Because we never know when it might rain in life, Dorothy replied simply, and a little colour always helps on grey days. Henry observed the interaction with a mixture of relief and apprehension. There was something in the way Dorothy spoke with the girls, direct, honest, without the condescending tone many adults used, that seemed to resonate deeply with them. I need to go to the office, announced Henry, checking his watch. The girls' schedule is on the refrigerator, as always. Anything my number is noted on the first page of the schedule, along with emergency numbers and the school address, completed Dorothy, with a reassuring smile. Don't worry, Mr. Henry. Everything will be fine. There was a serene confidence in that statement that strangely calmed Henry. He said goodbye to his daughters with quick kisses and headed for the door. Mr. Henry, called Dorothy before he left, may I ask a question? Of course, he replied, intrigued. Can the girls play in the garden today? I noticed the day is particularly beautiful. The question, so simple, made Henry hesitate. The garden, although enclosed and safe within the community, was a space he rarely allowed the girls to use without direct supervision. It was one more of the many boundaries he had established in the name of safety. Yes, he finally replied, surprising himself. They can play in the garden, but only within the perimeter of the fence and not too close to the pool. Understood, nodded Dorothy. When Henry left, he looked in the rearview mirror of his car and saw Dorothy standing at the door watching him leave. There was no accusation in her gaze, just infinite patience, like someone who knows that some transformations take time. At the office throughout the day, Henry found himself checking his cell phone frequently, expecting calls or messages about problems at home. But the phone remained silent. Only in the middle of the afternoon did he receive a message, a photo sent by Dorothy, showing the twins in the garden, building what appeared to be a fort with sheets stretched between chairs. Both were smiling, their faces illuminated by a joy Henry hadn't seen in a long time. Below the photo, a simple message, "They are safe and happy, have a good day." Henry stared at the photo for a long time, feeling an emotion he couldn't name. There was something deeply moving about the scene, not just his daughter's smiles, but the simplicity of the play, something he had forgotten that children needed. Freedom to create, to get dirty, to transform sheets into castles and chairs, into fortresses. When he returned home that night, he was greeted by a delicious aroma coming from the kitchen. He found Dorothy and the twins preparing dinner together, something he had never allowed before, fearing accidents with knives or fire. "Dad!" exclaimed Lily when she saw him. "We're making gnocchi. Mrs. Dorothy is teaching us her grandmother's recipe." Henry observed the scene, flour spread on the counter, his daughter's small hands shaping the dough under Dorothy's attentive supervision. It was a scene of domestic normality that strongly contrasted with the silent and organized meals they usually had. "It looks delicious," he commented, placing his briefcase on the sideboard. "Can I help?" The look of surprise on his daughter's faces almost made him step back, but Dorothy's encouraging smile kept him steady. "Of course," replied Dorothy, indicating a space at the counter. "We need someone with strong hands to knead." This part. That night, for the first time in years, the Miller family dined amid laughter and conversation. The twins told stories about the fort in the garden, about how they had read stories inside it, about how Dorothy had taught them to identify birds by their songs. Later, after putting the girls to bed, who surprisingly didn't resist sleep as was usual, Henry found Dorothy in the living room, silently organizing the scattered toys. "Thank you," he said simply, the words carrying a meaning that went beyond gratitude for a day's work. Dorothy smiled, that serene smile that seemed to understand much more than what was said. "They are wonderful girls, Mr. Henry, full of light and life. They just need space to shine." Henry nodded, feeling the weight of those words. "I think I've been keeping that space very limited." "Fear does that to us," replied Dorothy without judgment. But love is greater than fear. It always has been. Always will be. As Dorothy said goodbye and walked to the taxi stand, Henry remained at the door watching her leave. The colorful umbrella swayed gently in her hand, like a reminder that, even under the clearest sky, it's good to be prepared for rain, not with fear, but with the colorful certainty that every storm passes. The days transformed into weeks, and, with each dawn, subtle changes were happening in the Miller house. They weren't drastic or easily identifiable transformations, but small details that, added together, were beginning to alter the atmosphere of that home. A month after Dorothy's arrival, a new routine had been established. Henry's rigid rules hadn't completely disappeared, but now coexisted with small rituals introduced by the caregiver, rituals that brought a breath of lightness and spontaneity to the twins' lives. Every night after dinner, the family now sat at the kitchen table for what Dorothy called moment of the day. It was a simple ritual. Each one shared something good that had happened that day and something that had been difficult. In the beginning, Henry participated reluctantly, his answers, always professional and contained, a successful case in court, a signed contract, a productive meeting. But the daughters, encouraged by Dorothy's presence, began to share increasingly genuine thoughts. Today, Miss Cecilia praised my drawing in front of the whole class, Lily shared on one of these nights, her eyes shining with pride. She said I have a talent for colors. I got nervous during my science presentation, admitted Madison on another occasion, looking at her plate. But I remembered what Mrs. Dorothy said about taking 3 deep breaths, and I managed to speak without stuttering. Dorothy always listened with genuine attention, asking questions that showed real interest in the girls' experiences. And Henry, almost without realizing it, began to observe his daughters more closely during these moments, noticing expressions, gestures and emotions that previously went unnoticed amid the daily rush. Another ritual that became part of the routine was Sunday tea at 5. Dorothy, who normally didn't work on weekends, began to appear spontaneously on Sunday afternoons, always bringing some different herb to prepare tea and homemade cookies that she baked with the girls. It's a tradition in my family, she explained, once while arranging the table on the porch with a crocheted tablecloth. My grandmother used to say that a good conversation around a table with hot tea cures almost any sadness. Initially, Henry kept himself away from these gatherings, taking refuge in his office with the excuse of pending work. But the sound of his daughter's laughter, increasingly frequent, began to attract him like an invisible magnet. On a particularly sunny Sunday in June, while organizing documents, Henry heard a laugh that made him stop mid-movement. It was Madison, his Madison, always so contained and serious, laughing in a way he hadn't heard since before the accident. Without realizing it, he found himself walking to the porch, attracted by that sound which, he realized with a pang in his heart, had become too rare in his house. On the porch, he found a scene that seemed out of another reality. Dorothy, wearing an extravagant hat made of newspaper, was telling an apparently hilarious story about her youth, gesturing dramatically. The twins, also wearing improvised hats, were laughing until they turned red. "Dad!" exclaimed Lily when she noticed him standing at the door. "Come join our mad tea party. Mrs. Dorothy is telling us about when she worked in a circus." Henry hesitated, feeling out of place amid that spontaneous joy. Part of him, that controlling and fearful part, wanted to retreat to the safety of his office, to the organized world of cases and arguments. But another part, one that had been slowly gaining strength, yearned to connect with that moment. "Come, Mr. Henry," invited Dorothy naturally, as if his presence was expected. "We have a hat reserved for you." To his own surprise, Henry approached and allowed Madison to place a conical hat made of colorful magazine pages on his head. The girls laughed, not mockingly, but with genuine joy at seeing him participate in the game. "We were just talking about adventures," explained Dorothy, serving him a cup of tea, "about how the best stories of life are those we don't plan. Dad doesn't like unplanned things very much, commented Lily with the direct honesty of children. Henry felt his face heat up, embarrassed by his daughter's accurate observation. He was about to defend himself when Dorothy gently intervened. "We all have our ways of navigating the world," she said, passing a small basket of cookies to Henry. "Some like detailed maps. Others prefer to discover the path as they walk. There's no right or wrong, just different journeys." The absence of judgment in Dorothy's words disarmed Henry. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel the need to justify his way of being, to defend his choices. "I guess I've always been the type who likes maps," he admitted with a half-smile, trying one of the cookies. "And I've always been the type who gets lost, even with GPS," laughed Dorothy. "Ask the girls about our adventure trying to get to the municipal park last week." The twins burst into laughter again, and Madison began enthusiastically to tell how Dorothy had transformed a wrong turn into an urban expedition that ended with them discovering a small hidden bookstore where they bought used books. As he listened to the story, Henry experienced an uncomfortable realization. When was the last time he had provided his daughters with this kind of spontaneous joy? When had he allowed a plan to go wrong, and instead of frustration, they found fun in the unexpected? The tea at 5 extended into the early evening that Sunday, with Henry participating increasingly actively in the conversations. When the stars began to appear in the New Haven sky, he found himself telling his daughters stories from his own childhood. Mischief with his older brother, disastrous, camping trips, the dog he had as a child, stories he had never shared before. "Dad smiles differently when he talks about Uncle John," observed Madison later, as Henry tucked her in. "He seems more young." The observation, so simple and direct, hit Henry deeply. "Really?" he asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. Madison nodded solemnly. "Mum used to smile like that too when she talked about her brother." The mention of Claire didn't cause the usual pang of pain. Instead, Henry felt a strange peace in realizing that Madison could talk about her mother naturally, as part of a normal conversation, without the weight of the taboo he himself had unconsciously created around the subject. "Your mom and Uncle Richard were very close," he confirmed, surprised by the ease with which the words came out. He called her Claire Bear just to tease her, because she hated nicknames. Madison smiled, nestling deeper into the covers. "Tell me more about Mom." In other times, Henry would have changed the subject, fearing that talking about Claire would reopen wounds or disturb the girl's sleep. But that night, sitting in the room illuminated only by the moon-shaped nightlight, he felt able, and more than that, felt it his duty, to keep Claire's memory alive for his daughters. "Your mother had a laugh that you could hear from the other side of the house," he began, his voice soft. "And she sang in the shower every morning, always the same 3 songs in the same order." Madison listened attentively, her eyes shining, absorbing each detail like a precious treasure. When she finally fell asleep, there was a smile on her lips that accompanied Henry for the rest of the night. The rituals continued to accumulate in the following weeks. On Tuesdays, Dorothy took the girls for a gardening lesson in the small patch they had created in the back of the yard. On Thursdays, it was backwards dinner day. They started with dessert and ended with the appetizer, a fun subversion of the normal order that the twins loved. On Saturday mornings, they had picnics in the garden regardless of the weather. On rainy days, the picnic happened on the porch, to the sound of falling water. And in each of these moments, Henry found himself increasingly present, increasingly participative, not because he felt obligated, but because he genuinely wanted to be there. The greatest proof of the transformation that was occurring came on an ordinary Tuesday, when Henry returned home earlier than usual, without warning. Upon silently entering the house, he heard music coming from the living room. An old song he immediately recognized. It was "Bridge Over Troubled Water" by Simon and Garfunkel, Claire's favorite song, which they used to dance to on Friday nights. Following the sound, he found Dorothy and the girls dancing freely around the living room, the furniture pushed aside to create space. Dorothy twirled with open arms, while Lily tried to imitate her movements, and Madison danced with her eyes closed, completely immersed in the melody. For a moment, Henry felt a confused mix of emotions: nostalgia, pain, jealousy, gratitude. That song carried so many memories. He was about to make himself noticed when Lily opened her eyes and saw him. "Dad, come dance with us," she invited, running to him and pulling him by the hand. Henry allowed himself to be led to the center of the room, aware of Madison's surprised looks and Dorothy's tranquil smile. The music, his daughter's presence, the memory of Claire, everything, mixed in his chest, creating an overwhelming emotion. "This was Mom's favorite song," said Madison, observing him carefully. "Yes," confirmed Henry, his voice breaking. "We used to dance together." "Then dance with us now," suggested Dorothy. Gently. "Claire would be happy to see the three of you dancing." And Henry danced. Awkwardly at first, then with growing abandon, twirling with his daughters around the room while Simon and Garfunkel sang about troubled water and bridges. When the music ended, the three were breathless and smiling, united in a moment that seemed magical. "Again, Dad?" asked Lily enthusiastically. Henry looked at Dorothy, who was watching the scene with moist eyes, one hand resting on the back of the sofa. "Thank you," he silently mouthed to her. Dorothy just nodded, a gesture that said, "It wasn't me. It was you. It was always you." That night, after the girls were asleep, Henry invited Dorothy for a coffee before she left. Sitting on the porch with the night view of New Haven stretching out before them, they shared a comfortable silence before Henry finally spoke. "I don't know how to thank you for what you've done for the girls," he began, holding the coffee cup with both hands. "They're different, more alive." "Children are like plants, Mr. Henry," replied Dorothy, looking at the horizon. "They need space to grow, light to flourish. And they also need boundaries, of course, but boundaries that protect without suffocating." "I think I've been more electric fence than living hedge," admitted Henry with a sigh. Dorothy laughed softly. "You've been a father who loves deeply, who did the best he could with the emotional tools he had available at that moment." Henry felt a lump in his throat. The gentleness with which Dorothy spoke of his mistakes, without minimizing them but also without judging him, was disconcerting. "You know," she continued, "I lost my husband 20 years ago. We raised our 3 children together, and when he passed, the youngest was only 12. I was afraid too. I also built walls." Henry looked at her with surprise. At no point had Dorothy mentioned her own experience with grief or raising children alone. "How did you manage?" he asked, the question coming out almost as a whisper. "One day at a time," replied Dorothy simply, "learning to distinguish between what was real fear and what was just the echo of my suffering, allowing myself to fail, allowing myself to laugh, even when guilt said I didn't have that right." Her words resonated deeply with Henry, illuminating corners of his experience that he had never been able to articulate. "And your children? How are they now?" he asked, genuinely interested. Dorothy's face lit up with maternal pride. "Grown, happy, each in their own way. One is a university professor in New York, another is a chef in Chicago, and my youngest is a pediatrician right here in Boston. They all carry their father in their hearts, but none remained trapped in the pain of loss. Life went on as it should." Henry nodded, absorbing those words like a balm. The idea that his daughters could grow up emotionally healthy, carrying their mother's memory without being defined by her absence, was deeply comforting. "I think I needed to hear that," he admitted, feeling an unusual lightness. "Life has a curious way of sending us the right people at the right time," replied Dorothy, finishing her coffee, "even if sometimes we try to prevent them from entering through the front door." They both laughed, remembering their disastrous first meeting. When Dorothy stood up to leave, Henry accompanied her to the door with a strange feeling that something important had been triggered that night, something that had begun with an impromptu dance and ended now with the silent promise of new beginnings. "Until tomorrow, Mr. Henry," Dorothy said goodbye, opening her eternal, colorful umbrella despite the starry night. "Until tomorrow, Dorothy," replied Henry. And for the first time he felt that there really was a tomorrow to look forward to, not just another day to survive. In the girls' room, The blue notebooks rested on the dressers, ready to be placed in the hand luggage the next morning. On the last page of each, Dorothy had written the same message in her elegant and firm handwriting. Family is who helps us grow, and true love teaches us to fly, not to hold on. Saturday dawned with a different luminosity in New Haven. It was one of those perfect winter days in Massachusetts, intensely blue sky, dry air, and a mild temperature that invited outdoor activities. In the Miller house, breakfast was happening on the porch for the first time, a suggestion from Dorothy that to everyone's surprise Henry accepted without hesitation. "Can we ride bikes today?" asked Lily as she spread strawberry jam on her bread. "It's been so long since we used the bikes." Henry swallowed hard. The girls' bicycles, 7th birthday presents, had been used few times. After Madison's light fall, that resulted in a small scratch on her elbow, Henry had stored them in the garage, considering the activity too dangerous for the girls without proper supervision. And proper supervision by his standards meant helmet, knee pads, elbow pads, gloves, and his constant presence, conditions rarely met amid the busy routine. "I don't know, Lily. You haven't practiced in a long time. You might have lost your eye." "Touch," he argued, seeking a reasonable excuse. "Riding a bicycle is like swimming, Mr. Henry," Dorothy gently intervened, serving more coffee. "You never really forget. Besides, the community is safe and the street in front has little traffic." Henry hesitated. Part of him, that part that still mentally catalogued all possible risks before any decision, wanted to refuse. But another, a part strengthened by the experiences of recent months, recognized that he needed to loosen the reins at least a little. "All right," he finally conceded, to the evident joy of the twins. "But with helmets and knee pads, and you stay only on the street in front of the house where I can see you from the porch." The girls nodded enthusiastically, barely containing their excitement. After breakfast, they ran to the garage with Dorothy to rescue the forgotten bicycles. Henry followed more slowly, feeling a familiar apprehension grow in his chest. In the garage, the bicycles were covered with a thin layer of dust, a pink one with a basket in front for Lily, a blue one with star stickers for Madison. Henry remembered the day he bought them. Claire was still alive, and the whole family had gone out to choose the birthday presents. Claire advocated that the girls should have real bicycles, not those with training wheels, arguing that one only learns to balance by trying to balance. Henry wanted the safest ones possible. In the end, as always, Claire's enthusiasm prevailed. "We need to inflate the tires," said Dorothy, bringing Henry back to the present, "and adjust the seats. They've grown since the last time." In the following minutes, Henry busied himself with the mechanical adjustments, checking brakes, handlebar height, tire pressure, while Dorothy helped the girls with the safety equipment. There was something therapeutic about that manual work, in the concentration necessary to ensure everything worked perfectly. "I remember when my father taught me to ride a bicycle," commented Dorothy, observing Henry work. "He had a particular method. He said we only learn to balance when we feel we might fall, but trust that we won't." Henry raised his eyes from the chain he was adjusting. "Sounds like a risky method." "Life is a risky method, Mr. Henry," replied Dorothy with a serene smile. "The question isn't avoiding all risks, but knowing which ones are worth the joy they provide." Dorothy's words echoed in Henry's mind as he finished the adjustments. There was a simple wisdom in them that resonated with the changes he had been experiencing in recent months, the gradual understanding that his attempt to control all aspects of his daughters' lives was, in fact, limiting them in ways he was only now beginning to perceive. Finally, everything was ready. The bicycles gleamed under the morning sun, the girls equipped like small astronauts with all possible protectors. Henry made one last check of each safety item before allowing them to go out to the street. "Slowly at first. Remember to use the brakes and don't go where I can't see you," he instructed, his heart racing as he watched them pushing the bicycles out of the garage. Lily, always bolder, was the first to mount. After a few hesitant pedals, she found the rhythm and was soon circling the street with growing confidence. Madison, more cautious, took a little longer, starting with small impulses while keeping her feet close to the ground. Henry watched tensely from the sidewalk in front of the house, ready to run at the slightest sign of imbalance. Dorothy remained, At his side, a tranquil presence that somehow served as a counterweight to his anxiety. "Look, Dad, I'm doing it," shouted Madison, finally finding the courage to pedal continuously. "I see, sweetheart. You're doing very well," replied Henry, feeling a mix of pride and apprehension. The girls pedaled in increasingly wider circles, gaining confidence with each turn. Their faces displayed an initial concentration that gradually gave way to broad smiles. The sound of their laughter echoed down the quiet street of the community, attracting curious glances from some neighbors. "Let's race to that tree," suggested Lily, pointing to a maple tree a few meters ahead. "Lily, no racing," Henry immediately warned. "It's dangerous." But Lily, caught up in the euphoria of the moment, had already darted toward the tree, with Madison trying to keep up right behind her. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion for Henry. Madison, in an attempt to catch up with her sister, pedaled harder than she was accustomed to. The bicycle quickly gained speed, and when she tried to make the turn around the tree, the front wheel slipped on some loose stones. In an instant, Madison was on the ground, the bicycle fallen. At her side, "Madison!" shouted Henry, running toward her with his heart in his throat. All his fears seemed to materialize at that moment. The fall, the injury, the proof that his protective instinct was right all along. When he reached his daughter, Madison was already sitting up, looking at her scraped knee with more surprise than pain. A trickle of blood ran down her leg, staining her white sock. "Maddie, are you okay?" asked Lily, dropping her own bicycle and kneeling beside her sister. Henry knelt before his daughter, the initial panic giving way to an instinct for action. "Where does it hurt, sweetie? Can you move your leg? Do you think you hurt anything besides your knee?" Madison looked at her father, and then, surprisingly, gave a small smile. "I just scraped my knee, Dad. It doesn't hurt that much." Henry blinked, stunned by his daughter's calmness. He expected tears, screams, perhaps even a permanent aversion to bicycles. Instead, Madison seemed almost proud. Dorothy approached calmly, carrying the small bag she always brought with her. "Let's take a look at that scrape, Maddie," she said, kneeling beside them. With efficient but gentle gestures, Dorothy cleaned the wound with moist wipes she took from her bag, removing the dust and small embedded stones. Madison bit her lip a few times but didn't cry. "You know, when I was a girl, my mother used to say that scraped knees are medals of courage," commented Dorothy as she applied an antiseptic. "They mean you tried something new, that you were brave." "Like battle scars?" asked Madison, intrigued by the idea. "Exactly," confirmed Dorothy with a smile. "Each scrape tells a story of adventure." Henry watched the interaction in silence, a slow revelation forming in his mind. Claire would have said something similar. Claire, who always encouraged the girls to try new things, who didn't fear a few scratches and bruises as a natural part of childhood. "I think I'll need a bandage," said Madison, examining her own knee with clinical interest. "I have something better than a common bandage," replied Dorothy, taking a small first aid kit from her bag. From inside it, she removed a colorful bandage with star prints. "To match your bicycle," she explained with a wink. Madison smiled delightedly as Dorothy applied the bandage. When she finished, the girl looked at her father as if seeking his reaction. It was at that moment that Henry had a choice to make. He could reinforce his fears, forbid the bicycles again, gather the girls for the controlled safety of the house. Or he could take a different step, one that respected Madison's small adventure and the courage she demonstrated. Taking a deep breath, Henry extended his hand and helped Madison to her feet. Then, to everyone's surprise, including his own, he knelt and gave a gentle kiss to the star-covered bandage. "Your first medal of courage," he said with a breaking voice. "Your mother would be proud." Madison's eyes widened, bright with emotion. "Really?" "Really," confirmed Henry. "She always said you needed to collect experiences, not just toys." "Can I keep riding?" asked Madison hesitantly, clearly expecting. A negative. Henry hesitated for only a second. "If you feel up to it, yes, but maybe a little slower this time." The smile that illuminated Madison's face at that moment was like a sunbeam after a long storm, bright, warm, and full of promise. With an enthusiastic nod, she stood up, tested her leg to confirm she was okay, and walked determinedly toward her fallen bicycle. Dorothy gently touched Henry's shoulder. "That was important," she said quietly. "More than you can imagine." Henry nodded, feeling an emotion he couldn't name expand in his chest. He watched Madison mounting her bicycle again, more cautious now, but not defeated. Lily pedaled beside her, offering words of encouragement he couldn't hear from the distance. "They're strong," he commented, more to himself than to Dorothy. "They always were," she replied simply. They were just waiting for permission to show it. The rest of that morning passed at a different rhythm. The girls continued riding their bicycles, now with more care but no less enthusiasm. Henry remained on the sidewalk, vigilant but not suffocating, allowing them to explore their own balance, their own limits. Later, while having ice cream on the porch, another small pleasure that had become more frequent in recent months, Lily made a comment that would remain etched in Henry's memory. "Mom would have loved to see us on bicycles today," she said casually, licking a drop of chocolate that dripped down the cone. "She always said she wanted to see us flying." Henry felt a lump in his throat. "She said that?" "Uh-huh," confirmed Lily. "Once when you were working, she took us to the park. There were some boys skateboarding, doing tricks. Maddie said it looked dangerous, and Mom said that sometimes we need to risk falling to learn to fly." Madison, who had been silent until then, added, "She said you always wanted to keep us safe in the nest, but that one day we would need to learn to use our own wings." The girl's words hit Henry like a revelation. Claire had always been the counterpoint to his cautious nature, the balance that allowed the girls to explore the world safely, but without fear. With her passing, that balance was lost, and Henry compensated by becoming even more protective, more controlling. He looked at Dorothy, who was discreetly arranging the cups used for breakfast. Somehow this grey-haired lady with the colourful umbrella had assumed the role that Claire had left vacant, not replacing her, never that, but offering that other side of the parental equation that the girls so desperately needed. "What are you thinking about, Dad?" asked Madison, noticing his prolonged silence. "About how you're growing up," he replied honestly, "and how proud I am of the young women you're becoming." The twins exchanged surprised looks, unaccustomed to this type of emotional declaration from their father. "Even with scraped knees," teased Madison with a mischievous smile. "Especially with scraped knees," confirmed Henry, returning the smile. The following morning, the phone rang while the family finished Sunday breakfast. Henry answered in his home office, and the girls continued their animated conversation with Dorothy, who had appeared early for the tea at 5 brought forward. When Henry returned to the room a few minutes later, there was a strange expression on his face, a mixture of excitement and apprehension that immediately caught everyone's attention. "Is everything okay, Dad?" asked Lily, always attentive to changes in her father's mood. Henry sat down slowly as if he needed to process what he had just heard. "That was Gordon Mackenzie, an English colleague I met at an international law conference last year," he explained. He just offered me a position at their firm in London." The dense silence that followed was full of meaning. The girls looked at their father with wide eyes, trying to process the information. Dorothy remained serene but attentive to each one's reaction. "London?" repeated Madison finally. "Like London in England?" "Yes," confirmed Henry. "It's an incredible professional opportunity. The Mackenzie and Associates firm is one of the most prestigious in Europe. They're expanding their international law area and want someone with experience in negotiations with American companies." Would we have to go too?" asked Lily, her voice small. The question hit Henry like a bucket of cold water. "Of course," he responded immediately. "I would never go without you. It would be the three of us starting a new phase together." The twins exchanged glances loaded with contradictory emotions: excitement for the adventure, fear of the unknown, sadness at the possibility of leaving behind what they knew. "And Mrs. Dorothy?" asked Madison, turning to the caregiver, who remained silent. "Would she come with us too?" The question hung in the air like a soap bubble, fragile, iridescent, filled with childish hope. Henry realized he hadn't considered this aspect. Dorothy had become so fundamental to the family's emotional balance that the idea of proceeding without her seemed incomplete. "I don't know," he admitted, looking at Dorothy with a questioning expression. Dorothy smiled serenely, that smile that seemed to contain ancient wisdom. "Children," she said softly, "each journey has its own companions. Some people accompany us all the way, others for just certain stretches. The important thing isn't how long we stay together, but what we learn from each other during that time." Henry felt the weight of those words. There was something between the lines, an anticipated farewell, a lesson about separations that don't need to be painful. "But I haven't decided anything yet," he hastened to explain. "I need to think very carefully, talk with you, understand if it's really the best for our family." Lily nodded, thoughtful. "It would be cool to see Big Ben and Buckingham Palace," she commented. "And we're learning about the museums there at school." "But it's very cold there, isn't it?" asked Madison, always practical. "We'd have to buy new coats." Henry smiled at the simplicity of childish concerns. "Yes, it's colder than here, but we'd have time to prepare, buy appropriate clothes. The offer is to start in January of next year." "That means we have 6 months to decide," questioned Lily. "Actually, they need an answer in the next 2 weeks," explained Henry. "But if we accept, yes, we'd have about 6 months to organize everything." The girls absorbed the information, each in her own way. Lily, expressive as always, was already imagining what the new school would be like, the new friends, the possibility of learning real English. Madison, more introspective, looked out the window at the garden where they had ridden bicycles the day before, as if trying to memorize every detail. Dorothy observed the scene with attentive eyes and an open heart. There was a silent understanding in her gaze, the perception that regardless of the decision they made, an important cycle was coming to an end. And like every ending, it brought with it the promise of new beginnings. "What do you think about all this?" Henry finally asked, aware that for the first time his daughter's opinion would be fundamental to his decision. "I think," replied Madison slowly, her eyes meeting her father's, "that Mum would say it's time for us to learn to fly farther." Her words, so simple and so profound, touched Henry at the core of his being. At that moment, he felt Claire present among them, not as a painful memory but as a guiding light, a shared wisdom that continued to live through their daughters. "I think you're right, Maddie," he agreed. With a breaking voice, "I think she would say exactly that." On the porch, Dorothy's colorful umbrella rested against the wall, closed under the bright sun of that Massachusetts winter morning. Even with no rain in sight, its presence was a constant reminder. Being prepared for life's storms doesn't mean living in fear of them, but facing them with colors and courage when and if they arrive. The 2 weeks following the London proposal were intense for the Miller family. Henry, methodical as always, created a detailed spreadsheet with pros and cons of the move. He researched international schools, safe neighborhoods for families, the British healthcare system, and even climate statistics. Each data point was carefully analyzed, every detail considered from all possible perspectives. But unlike in the past, Henry didn't make the decision alone. Every night after dinner, the family gathered in the living room for what they called the London Council. The twins had an active voice, bringing genuine questions and concerns. What would it be like to make friends in another language? Could they take all their books and toys? Would there be maple trees in England? "I don't think they have maple trees there," replied Henry one of these nights, smiling at Madison's question. "But they have other fruits we don't know. It could be an adventure to discover them." "Like when we went to Old Forge and tried fig preserves for the first time?" asked Lily, recalling a trip made before Claire's accident. "Exactly like that," confirmed Henry, surprised by the positive memory his daughter had kept. At the time, he had been concerned about the store's hygiene, possible allergies, excessive sugar. Claire, however, had insisted that the girls try it, arguing that flavor, memories are treasures we carry forever. Claire was right, as so many times. The girls didn't remember his concerns, but vividly kept the shared experience, the different taste, the soft texture of the preserves. Dorothy participated discreetly in these family councils, offering insights when requested, but always maintaining a stance of non-interference in fundamental decisions. There was wisdom in her silence, an understanding that her role was to facilitate the strengthening of bonds between father and daughters, not to become indispensable. On the Thursday that marked the deadline for the response, Henry gathered his daughters after dinner for a decisive conversation. Dorothy, perceiving the important moment, offered to wash the dishes while the family talked. "No, Dorothy," asked Henry, surprising everyone. "Please stay. You're an important part of this." Decision 2. Seated in the living room with the mild New Haven night visible through the open windows, Henry looked at each face around him. Lily, with her overflowing enthusiasm, Madison, with her perceptive observation, and Dorothy, with her serenity. That anchored them all. "So," he began, taking a deep breath, "I think we've reached the moment to decide. I have some ideas, but I want to hear from you first. How do you feel about moving to London after thinking about it for 2 weeks? Lily was the first to respond, as always. "I'm excited, Dad. I really want to see new places, learn real English, make different friends, but I'm also a little scared." "Scared of what, exactly?" asked Henry, genuinely interested in his daughter's concerns. "What if they don't like me? What if I can't speak properly with them? What if we miss here too much?" Henry nodded, recognizing the legitimacy of those fears. "And you, Maddie, what do you think?" Madison, as usual, took a few moments to organize her thoughts before responding. "I'm excited too, but worried about other things. How will we keep Mom's memories if we're far from the house where she lived? And who will take care of the sunflower patch we planted? And Mrs. Dorothy, we'll miss her so much." The mention of Dorothy brought a momentary silence to the room. It was an issue that hung over everyone, but that no one had verbalized so directly until that moment. "About that," said Henry, choosing his words carefully, "I spoke with Mrs. Dorothy yesterday. I asked if she would consider the possibility of coming with us to London, at least during the adaptation period." The twins' eyes lit up with hope, turning instantly to Dorothy, who smiled affectionately. "And what did you answer?" asked Lily anxiously. Dorothy looked at Henry silently, asking permission to respond. With his nod, she addressed the girls with a serene voice. "I explained to your father that my journey with you is reaching an important point. Not the end, but a transformation. I have 3 children and 2 grandchildren here in the United States. My place is near them, just as your place is beside your father, wherever he may be." Lily's face visibly fell. "So you're not coming with us," she stated, the disappointment evident in her voice. "Not physically," confirmed Dorothy with gentleness, "but what we've built together, the affection, the memories, the lessons, that goes with you because it's now part of who you are." Madison, always more intuitive, frowned. "But if you don't go, how will we remember everything you taught us? How will we know what to do when we're sad or confused?" Dorothy smiled, her eyes shining with contained emotion. "I have something. For you that might help with that," she said, leaning over to pick up her bag beside the sofa. From inside the bag, she took out 2 identical navy blue notebooks, tied with a colorful ribbon. She extended one to each girl with solemn gestures. "What is this?" asked Lily, carefully undoing the ribbon's knot. "They're notebooks of memories and wisdom," explained Dorothy. "In the first pages, I wrote some of our memories together. Special moments, funny things that happened, small victories we celebrated. Then there are some pages with what I call advice for difficult days, ideas for when you feel sad, lonely, or afraid." The girls leafed through the notebooks with reverence, discovering pages carefully handwritten, small drawings in the margins, even photographs that Dorothy had discreetly taken during the months together. "The rest of the pages are blank," continued Dorothy, "for you to fill with your own adventures, discoveries, and lessons. Life is a notebook we write every day, with our choices and our hearts." Henry observed the scene with a lump in his throat, touched by the delicacy of the gesture. In a few months, Dorothy had become more than an employee. She was a fundamental presence, an emotional anchor that helped everyone navigate through grief and fear to a place of greater balance. "There's a special section here in the back," noticed Madison, reaching the last pages of her notebook. "Memories of your mother." Dorothy nodded, glancing sideways at Henry as if apologizing for the boldness. "I asked your father to share some stories and memories about Claire, things he may never have told you, but that are important for you to know." Henry felt tears welling up. In previous weeks, Dorothy had approached him with this unusual request, that he share memories of Claire to include in the girls' notebooks. At first, the idea terrified him. Talking about Claire still hurt. But as he began to remember, he realized that along with the pain came also gratitude, smiles, the certainty that that love had left marks too beautiful to remain hidden. "Was it your idea, Dad?" asked Lily, looking at him with a new understanding. "It was Mrs. Dorothy's idea," admitted Henry, "but I liked doing it, remembering Mom in a different way." "Different how?" questioned Madison. Henry thought for a moment, seeking the right words. "For a long time, remembering Mom only made me feel sadness and fear, but when I started telling these stories for Mrs. Dorothy to write down, I realized I can also feel joy and gratitude when I think of her, that I can celebrate the time we had together, instead of just lamenting the time we lost." A thoughtful silence hung in the room. The twins looked at the blue notebooks as if they were holding priceless treasures. "So," resumed Henry, returning to the original topic, "back to our decision about London. What do you think?" The girls exchanged looks, seeming to communicate, silently as only twins can do. "I think we want to go," said Lily finally, speaking for both. "It'll be hard to leave Mrs. Dorothy, our school friends, this house, but it'll also be an adventure. And now we have the notebooks to help us remember everything that's important. And we can bring a bit of America with us," added Madison. "Like the sunflower seeds from our garden. Mrs. Dorothy said they also grow in England, just at different times of the year." Henry smiled, recognizing Dorothy's practical wisdom in that comment. She had prepared the girls, not only emotionally, but also with concrete ideas of how to maintain connections with their roots. "So it's decided?" he asked, wanting to be sure. "We're going to London?" "We're going," the twins answered in unison, their voices mixing enthusiasm and determination. That same night, after putting the girls to bed, Henry found Dorothy on the porch, preparing to leave. The starry Massachusetts sky stretched above them, infinite and welcoming. "I don't know how to thank you for everything," said Henry, leaning against the doorframe. "You've changed our lives, Dorothy." The lady smiled, that serene smile that had become so familiar and comforting. "It wasn't me, Mr. Henry. You always had within you everything you needed to be the father your daughters needed. I just helped remove some obstacles from the path." "Obstacles called fear and guilt," completed Henry with a sigh. "You taught me the difference between protecting and suffocating, between loving and controlling." "Fear is a terrible teacher," replied Dorothy, adjusting the shawl over her shoulders. "It teaches us to build walls when we need bridges, to create rules when we need understanding, to distrust when we need to have faith." Henry nodded, absorbing the wisdom of those words. "The girls will miss you very much. I will too." "Physical distance is just one type of separation," said Dorothy softly. "There are other ways of being present in each other's lives, through memories, lessons learned, gazes we recognize in the eyes of those we love." "You always have the right words," observed Henry with a sad smile. "They're not my words," replied Dorothy. "They're truths that existed before me and will continue after. Like those stars up there," she pointed to the sky. "They've been there for millions of years, even when we don't see them. Love is like that too." They remained silent for a few moments, contemplating the starry sky. A gentle breeze swayed the leaves of the garden trees, creating a quiet murmur that lulled the night. "You know," Dorothy finally said, "when Paul called me that morning, talking about a widowed lawyer with twin daughters, something told me it would be important. I didn't imagine how much or how, but I felt I needed to accept." "Was it destiny?" asked Henry, surprised at himself for considering such a concept. Dorothy smiled. "I prefer to think it was Claire." The mention of Claire, made with such naturalness, didn't bring the usual pang of pain. Instead, Henry felt a strange peace spread in his chest. "What do you mean?" he asked, genuinely curious. I believe that those we love never completely leave us, explained Dorothy. They find ways to continue caring for us even when they're not physically present. Sometimes they send people, situations, small signs. The idea was comforting, even for someone as pragmatic as Henry. Imagining Claire discreetly orchestrating their meeting, ensuring that her daughters and husband found a path to healing, seemed exactly the kind of thing she would do. "Well," said Dorothy, picking up her eternal colorful umbrella, "it's getting late. I should go." "I'll call a taxi," offered Henry, reaching for his cell phone. "That won't be necessary," replied Dorothy with a smile. "My son will pick me up. He should be arriving." As if to confirm her words, a car parked in front of the house, and a middle-aged man waved from the driver's window. "My youngest Matthew," introduced Dorothy with pride. "He's a pediatrician at Boston Medical Center. Whenever he can, he comes to pick me up when I work until later." Henry felt a pang of curiosity about Dorothy's personal life, a woman who knew so much about his family, but about whom he knew so little. "You never talked much about your children," he observed. "Because this time was about you, not about me," replied Dorothy with simplicity. "But now that our journey together is changing, perhaps it's time for you to know a little more about my story as well." They then arranged that, before the departure to London, Dorothy would bring her family for a farewell lunch, a chance to unite the two worlds that had coexisted separately until then. When Dorothy descended the porch steps toward her son's car, Henry noticed something curious. Despite the starry night and no sign of rain, she carried the colorful umbrella open, twirling it gently as she walked. "Always with the umbrella?" he asked with a smile. Dorothy stopped and looked back, her eyes shining under the porch light. "Do you know why I always carry this umbrella, Mr. Henry? It's not just to protect me from the rain." "No? It's to remind me that we always have choices. I can wait for the storm to pass locked at home, or I can go out with my colorful umbrella and dance in the rain. Life will have its storms anyway. It's up to us to decide how we want to face them." With a final wave, Dorothy got into her son's car and left, leaving Henry on the porch with those words echoing in his mind. The weeks that followed were of intense preparation. The formal acceptance of the offer, the visa application process, school research, decisions about what to take and what to leave behind. Amid all this, intensive English classes for the girls, consultations with the psychologist to help them with the transition, long lists of items to arrange. But, surprisingly, it wasn't the chaos that Henry feared. There was a natural order to the process, a flow that he allowed to happen without trying to control every detail. When something went wrong, like the delay in issuing visas or the problem with the international school documentation, he didn't panic. He resolved one step at a time, including the girls in decisions, asking for help when necessary. Dorothy continued with them during this period, but her role subtly changed. She was no longer just the children's caregiver, but a counselor for the whole family, helping them prepare emotionally for the transition. A week before departure, the promised lunch with Dorothy's family took place. The backyard of the Miller house, rarely used for social events in the past, transformed into a celebration space. Dorothy's 3 children, the university professor, the chef, and the doctor, brought their families, including the 2 teenage grandchildren. The twins, initially shy with so many strangers, soon became enchanted with the borrowed cousins, who showed them games on their phones and told stories about when Dorothy had cared for them during childhood. "Has she always had that colorful umbrella?" asked Lily to Matthew, Dorothy's youngest son, as they ate barbecue under the shade of the trees. "As long as I can remember," he confirmed with a smile. "My father gave it to her on their first wedding anniversary. When he passed away, the umbrella became even more special." "Your father passed away like our mum?" asked Madison with the frankness of children. Matthew nodded. "I was 12. It was difficult, but Mom taught us that we can carry the people we love in our hearts, even when we can no longer see them." The girls assimilated this information with interest, discovering that Dorothy also knew the pain of loss, that she had raised children alone as their father was doing now, seemed to connect them even more deeply to the lady who had transformed their lives. On the other side of the garden, Henry was talking with John, Dorothy's oldest son. a history professor at NYU. "Your mother is an extraordinary person," he commented, observing Dorothy laughing with the children. "She's always had that gift," agreed John, "of seeing what people need even before they know, of transforming houses into homes, of finding light even in the darkest moments." "How did she manage after your father?" "Passed away," completed John naturally. "It wasn't easy. There were very difficult days, but she used to tell us something I never forgot. Pain is not optional, but suffering is a choice. She taught us to honor the pain, to give it space, but not to allow it to define our future." The words resonated deeply with Henry. Wasn't that exactly what Dorothy had done with his family too? Taught them to honor the pain of Claire's loss, to talk about it, to keep her present in their memories, but without allowing that pain to paralyze them, to prevent them from living fully. The afternoon extended pleasantly with music, stories, and laughter. When the sun began to set, illuminating the New Haven sky with shades of orange and pink, Henry gathered everyone for a toast. "I want to thank each one for being here," he said, looking at the faces around. "This lunch marks not a farewell, but the beginning of a new phase. London will be an adventure, but Massachusetts will always be our home. And thanks to Dorothy and all of you, we take with us the most important thing, the certainty that family is not just who shares our blood, but who shares our path, even if for a time." They raised their glasses in an emotional toast. Dorothy, at the center of the group, seemed to glow with a quiet pride, not just for her own children and grandchildren, but also for this other family she had helped rebuild. On the eve of departure, after the suitcases were closed and the last details resolved, Henry invited Dorothy for a final family dinner. The girls prepared the table with care, even placing small cards with each person's name, decorated with colorful drawings. The dinner was simple, but loaded with meaning. Dishes that had become favorites in recent months, recipes that Dorothy had taught, flavors that would always remind them of that period of transformation. After dessert, Lily took a package wrapped in colorful paper and solemnly handed it to Dorothy. "It's a gift from the three of us," she explained, "for you to remember us while we're away." Dorothy opened the package carefully, revealing a new umbrella. It was similar to hers, colorful and sturdy. But with one difference: on the inner fabric, small scenes had been hand-painted representing shared moments. Tea on the porch, dancing in the living room, the picnic in the garden, bicycles on the street. "We helped an artist paint it," explained Madison, "so when you open the umbrella, even without rain, you can see our story together." Dorothy's eyes welled up, and for the first time since they had known her, they saw her truly moved, without that characteristic serenity that seemed impenetrable. "It's the most beautiful gift I've ever received," she said with a breaking voice, hugging the girls. Henry observed the scene with an overflowing heart. In just over 6 months, his family had traveled an emotional journey that seemed impossible at the beginning. From the shadows of fear and grief to the light of acceptance and hope. From the rigidity of control to the freedom of confident love. When the girls went upstairs to sleep, Henry accompanied Dorothy to the door one last time. On the porch, under the starry Massachusetts sky, they exchanged final words before the big change. "London isn't as far as it seems," said Dorothy, adjusting the new umbrella under her arm. "The world has shrunk with technology. We can talk by video, exchange messages, and when you come to visit, I'll be here waiting with hot coffee and fresh-baked muffins." "It won't be the same," replied Henry with honesty. "No, it won't be," agreed Dorothy. "It will be different. And different doesn't mean worse, just new. You three are ready for this new chapter, Mr. Henry. More than you imagine." "Thanks to you." Dorothy shook her head in denial. "Thanks to the love that always existed between you. I just helped remove the layers of fear that hid it." On the horizon, New Haven lights twinkled like terrestrial stars, the same sky they would soon see from London, just from a different angle. "Do you know what Claire would say at this moment?" asked Henry, surprising himself with the ease with which he spoke his wife's name. "What?" inquired Dorothy with an encouraging smile. She would say that I'm finally letting our daughters learn to fly. Dorothy nodded, her eyes shining under the porch light. And she would be right, because learning to fly doesn't mean abandoning the nest, but knowing you can always return to it. When the taxi arrived to pick up Dorothy, Henry watched her descend the porch steps with her new colorful umbrella. Before getting into the car, she opened it, with no rain in sight, just to contemplate the paintings inside. Her face lit up, with a smile at seeing the memories captured in the fabric. "Until we meet again, Mr. Henry," she said, waving with the open umbrella. "Until we meet again, Dorothy," he replied, feeling that those words carried a true promise. As the taxi drove away, Henry remained on the porch, feeling the gentle Massachusetts breeze caress his face. Tomorrow he and his daughters would depart for a new country, a new life. They would take suitcases full of clothes, documents, toys, and books. But they would also take something much more valuable: open hearts, minds free from paralyzing fear, and the certainty that true love, the one Claire felt for them, the one Dorothy had taught them to rediscover, knows no borders, neither of countries nor of time. In the girls' room, the blue notebooks rested on the dressers, ready to be placed in the carry-on bags the next morning. On the last page of each, Dorothy had written the